Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back in, and it is my pleasure to say, fellas, welcome to week one as we have the final picks. And I'm recording this now, obviously, this is coming out on Friday morning. And Saturday, there's going to be the That One Dude video. And Sunday will truly be those closing thoughts, that live stream before lock. Obviously, I'll have my exposures already finalized, fine-tuned, the ownership, optimizer settings, everything we need to do. We'll talk about that on Patreon in the morning. We'll talk about that on YouTube. But for right now, let's get into it. Everything that I've been doing, what do we got here? 23 pages of game-by-game notes, the projections, the ranks, the ownership, just filtering through news. It's ready to be attacked right now in this here video. So let's get right into it with the quarterback position. Like the video and let's slide into it. So on a big 13-game slate, the quarterback position is going to be vast. It's going to be interesting. And this is a GPP show. You want to play cash, we'll discuss that as well. But from a GPP perspective, there's a lot of great places to stack because there's so many high totals. If you see on the screen under environment right now, and if you're listening on the podcast, no worries, team totals. I mean, we're looking at team totals at 27, 26, 26, 27.5, 30, 29.5, right there for Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. Shocker, shocker. So all these quarterbacks look fantastic. It's really about how you can build that lineup around them. Is their salary like a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen or a Kyler, these guys who go off for 35 points a game, it seemed like last year? Is their salary too restrictive when you factor in who you can stack them with, or is it fine? Because of Patrick Mahomes, yeah, it's going to be tough to get Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, but when you have a Josh Allen, Steph Diggs, with all the value we have this week, and then a single-digit cheap Cole Beasley or Emmanuel Sanders for a double stack with the run back of all these cheap Pittsburgh Steelers, it's not a bad spot to be starting. So right away at the top, Josh Allen is firmly in play for me. And as it ranks right now, Josh Allen is my highest projected quarterback. But if you remember from last year, quarterback projections in ownership doesn't really fucking matter. It's all about the stacks. Like Josh Allen on a 13-game slate, he might be 10% owned. He'll probably be 7 or 8% owned. It'll be like him and Patrick Mahomes neck and neck right now for me in my ownership projections down below on Patreon. And now the major concern with Josh Allen is the fact that the Steelers are going to be fantastic. I mean, this might be, and at least on Pro Football Focus, looks like the worst offensive line versus defensive line matchup against the Steelers defensive line. That's a concern. But the pass to run ratio is going to be so pass heavy. I mean, you're looking at, even if they're leading by a lot in this game, 40 plus pass attempts for Josh Allen, not to mention probably 25 to 30 rushing yards on the ground. Last year, Josh Allen took off 6.5 times per game to run at about 26 rushing yards per game, a 27.25 team implied total. I like Josh Allen more than Mahomes, although both look really good, because you get that price discount of about $700, which is stark. I mean, that is something to be worth mentioning. Obviously, stacking him up with Steph Diggs, my second favorite option to stack him with would be Cole Beasley. And you can see I have a lot of yeses and maybes, and obviously this will change based on my final exposure. These are just my thoughts right now. I currently do have about 12 quarterbacks in a player pool. I'm not going to be running 12 quarterbacks out there in my 150s. I'll probably end up running in 150s somewhere around 8 quarterbacks, maybe 9 or 10, and those guys will be like 1% owned, but probably around 8 quarterbacks. Russell Wilson is really appealing to me. A 26 team implied total. There's just short favorites, not major favorites, 2.5 point favorites in this game, and the clear stacks are there. Whether you want to punt with Gerald Everett, the tight end, you can go to both DK, who will be lower owned, single-digit ownership right now for me on DK Metcalf, and or Tyler Lockett. Lockett, who's projecting for over 16 points. I like that combination a good amount against the Colts, who are going to play pretty zone heavy. Guys who have speed and can find the spaces like a DK Metcalf, find the spaces like a Tyler Lockett, especially in the red zone, they can beat those zones. And by the way, these are in no ranking order. This is just kind of how it filters through. Maybe it's alphabetical. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's by salary, the yes, no's, and maybes. Next up, we'll talk about Ryan Tannehill, who I think is going to be one of the best sleeper plays on the week. The Arizona game is going to pick up a lot of ownership. Kyler Murray will push Josh Allen, and he will push Patrick Mahomes as the highest owned quarterback this week for damn good reason. Through the first 10 weeks last year, he was the highest scoring fantasy quarterback ever because of his mobile upside. So there's going to be a lot of ownership coming in on Kyler Murray, especially when DeAndre Hopkins is a fair price and Rondale Moore is $3,000 flat. It makes it very easy to get to Kyler Murray, especially when you can go back to the other side with an A.J. Brown or a Julio Jones. So this game stack is going to look nice. And if any side of it is going to be higher owned, it would be the Arizona side. And as always with quarterbacks and game stacks, you can get different fairly easily. I mean, if you're playing a popular game stack, just don't play the popular 20% owned Marquez Callaway this week and pivot to somebody who's going to be 1% owned, maybe like his teammate Traquan Smith or Paris Campbell, right? Things like that, game theory-wise, to win a GPP. But another game theory thing you can do is flip the script. What is on the opposite side of this game? If people want to play Kyler Murray, yeah, it's because of mobile upside, but also because they think he's going to score a lot, meaning the game probably stays somewhat close, meaning that Ryan Tannehill on the opposite side becomes a pretty appealing option, because if you look at it, Tannehill's the favorite in this game, right? 27.5 team implied total. That might lean you to believe that 25 rushing attempts are coming for Derrick Henry, and it very well could. But right now, you're going to see Ryan Tannehill this week with the best matchup against the weakest secondary in the NFL. that just lost Malcolm Butler. He just retired. They have nobody else in the secondary. I mean, they're playing with some rookies. They're playing with 6-7 year veterans that have really not done much. Byron Murphy, they're hoping takes a step forward this year for Arizona. We'll see if that happens. But A.J. Brown and Julio Jones each have 32 to 45 pounds, a minimum of 32 pounds on each of the Arizona starting 3 cornerbacks. It's going to be an absolute just slugfest. Like, they're going to be able to do whatever they want. Not only are they bigger than them, they're faster at 99% speed scores. So this looks like a really nice spot for Ryan Tannehill, whether you want to double stack it, single stack it, run it back with Hopkins. A nice spot to get leverage on Ryan Tannehill in GPPs. Matt Ryan is on here as somebody I think will be probably 3% owned. He doesn't have that mobile upside that I do look for, which is concerning, but you know his target share, right? His targets are going to Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts, and Russell Gage. There's not much question out of that and in that order. So it's really easy to go, you know what, let's go Matt Ryan with Calvin Ridley and Pittman. That's a relatively cheap stack outside of Calvin Ridley. You run it back on the opposite side of that with just any of your options on Philadelphia. Want to go to a lone Miles Sanders. Want to go to any of these other guys who probably project for like a 15 to 18 to 20% target share in Zach Ertz and Goddard and Devonta Smith. My favorite would probably be for GPPs, Devonta Smith as a run back. Now, out of all these yeses you can see on the screen, my least favorite is probably Matt Ryan, and it has to do with the mobile upside that you're going to see and just overall efficiency. Tannehill, more mobile upside. Even Tannehill last year, I believe he ended up running for, not bad, 16.5 yards per game. So if I go down more, we already talked about Kyler Murray a little bit and Patrick Mahomes. Those guys are clearly in play. Kyler Murray at 24.5 team implied total, but he is a 3-point underdog, which pushes the tempo to throw a little bit more. No real workhorse running back. If anything, Edmonds in the backfield is going to benefit the most from the passing game. And then Mahomes, who I do think is probably like stacking this week. The Chiefs are probably the best stack. They're going to be low owned, but that's because they're damn expensive. But this is the week where you can play a $3,000 Terrace Marshall or Elijah Moore, a $3,600 Marvin Jones, Marquez Callaway at 34, right? There's enough value there to make this potentially work out for you. A bunch of punts at tight end if you weren't to play Kelsey for whatever reason in that stack. You can go McCole Hardman. So I do think that the Chiefs in Buffalo look like the best stacks. It's just a little bit difficult to get to from a overall price standpoint. But all these quarterbacks are in play. Some other guys at least worth mentioning as we go to running backs. Jalen Hurts, Kirk Cousins. These are on some of the opposite sides of these games. Like a Jalen Hurts, the only reason I don't totally love him is full-on game stacking him, double stacking him becomes a little bit harder, meaning he won't be in as many of my lineups. But obviously in play, definitely maybe the best cash quarterback on the slate. Kirk Cousins and that Joe Burrow. So Kirk Cousins and Joe Burrow, both sides of that one are in play. I like Burrow more because I think they're going to throw a lot more here, but it's really hard to not like Justin Jefferson this week. He's picking up single-digit ownership, and just pairing him up with Kirk Cousins means I'm going to get more Kirk Cousins than I expect. I would not be shocked by Sunday morning to see that Joe Burrow or a Kirk Cousins, one of those guys from that game, whichever side I land on. Cousins has the higher implied team total at 25.75. That one of those guys ends up being like one of my top 5 or 6 owned quarterback and jumps into a yes. And then at least worth mentioning, Trevor Lawrence and Aaron Rodgers on my radar right now. I don't think Rodgers will be owned at all with that last game on the slate. Easy stack it up with Devontae Adams, run it back with Alvin Kamara, and the chalky but cheap either Marquez Callaway or cheap and not chalky Traquan Smith. It's just an easy way to build lineups with stars and scrubs approach. I'd prefer Rodgers over Winston, although Winston is growing on me at 5,200. So that is the quarterback position. Before we get into the running back position, I want to let you know about one of the sponsors in part of the program today, which is Prize Picks, which a lot of you already know about Prize Picks, but what you may not know because it's just today, right now, as of Friday of recording this, that there is going to be a Patrick Mahomes specialty prop. If Patrick Mahomes throws for 1 yard, he's projected for 300, right? If he throws for 1 yard in this game, you win the bet. You could take the over-under. Now, there's going to be a limit of like 25 or 50 bucks you bet on it, but it's still free money. All you have to do is sign up, use the code SAL, and you'll get a free bet up to $100, so another bonus for you. You take Patrick Mahomes prop, you pair it up with any other props if you want to, and bam, it goes over 1 yard, over a half a yard, right? Over 1/2 a yard. So if he throws for 1 yard in this game, right, he's going to have at least a couple attempts. And if he somehow gets hurt, I'm sure they'll refund it. So no matter what, it's free money. Check it out. They're trying to get more eyes to their platform. It's a fantastic platform. Over-unders, if you want to see some of the ones that I've taken this week. Over-unders, naturally, generally speaking, the unders for regular season games usually are the way to go. Preseason's a little bit better because you have a better stance on it. But I'm taking the unders on a lot of players. I'm taking the unders on Mac Jones. Terrace Marshall's the one that scares me the most. This is their fantasy points, but you could obviously take props. We'll probably take more as the time goes on. But I like the under on Mac Jones. I think he's going to be fine. I just think they're going to run a lot. He's facing a top-tier secondary, so I have the under there. I have the under on Adam Thielen. And also the big one that I like the most is the under 19.5 on Big Ben. This is a tough matchup for Big Ben against the Bills secondary, but it's also probably going to be one where he might have to throw more as a 6.5 point underdog, but one where I still think they're going to try and push 15, 16 touches to Najee Harris. Going to play a little bit slower. So Big Ben at 19.5 is probably my favorite under. Now those are 5 unders. Obviously you don't have to take 5 unders. There's a couple other ones that I took on Thursday night. You're not going to see this in time, but you can check them out. That's a $200 to win $2,000, I believe. You don't have to get them all right is the nicest thing. If I get 4 out of 5 of those rights, I profit. If I get 3 out of 5 right, I win back the majority of my money. So it's a flex play. That's what I like about Prize Picks. Use the code SAL. Take advantage of that Mahomes prop. It's down below. Free money, literally free money. Get a free money bet up to $100, then you can win that Patrick Mahomes bet just obviously for free. So now the running back position, I'm trying to make a little bit of a shorter list here, but there's going to be a lot of maybes, but at least for the yeses, 6 guys stand out right away. And a lot of these running backs have ownership, but that's fine. Like, I'm okay to get to running backs if they're going to be popping up with a little bit of ownership. Like we said with the quarterbacks, ownership doesn't matter that much. It's going to matter at running back, but if you can get different within your stack, playing a guy who's like 15, 16% owned, especially McCaffrey will probably be 24% right now is where I have him in my ownership projections. I think that that's completely fine. So there's not much to say about Christian McCaffrey. I'd expect around 90% of the snaps in this game. I think McCaffrey is completely fine. I have McCaffrey projecting out as my highest projected player at 25.5 points, and I also have him. He's not my highest value, though. We'll talk about him in a second. And I also have him as my highest owned player, or not mine personally, but ownership projections, 24%. I don't think that there's a problem, though, pivoting to Alvin Kamara. I mean, Alvin Kamara, you're going to save some money right here. As you can see, Alvin Kamara is going to be almost $1,000 discount, and he was seeing a damn near 30% target share last year when there was not any Michael Thomas out there. And obviously, that was Drew Brees, who checks down a lot compared to Winston, so things can change now. But still, Kamara for $1,000 less, who has probably similar around floor to median outcome. Ceiling for McCaffrey, I would say, is a little bit higher because he's just an elite wide receiver. We even got to see it a few games with Joe Brady last year, but I would say that right there's a coin flip for me. If you need the extra $900, you want to go to wide receiver pay up, or you want to get to that stud, right? You want to get to that stud quarterback. If it's the difference between going to like a Russell Wilson or a Kyler Murray, if you think that's a big enough gap to go there, a 10 to 15 point gap for that ceiling of Kyler Murray, I don't think that it's that big of a hit from Christian McCaffrey to Alvin Kamara. Right now, I do have McCaffrey ranking out better as my number 2 overall play at the running back position, but number 3 is Alvin Kamara, so they're both right there. Austin Eckler got banged up in camp on Wednesday. He left. It was a potential hamstring injury. He didn't practice, but he said that he's ready to, like he said on Twitter afterwards, I'm ready to go week 1. It almost looked like a scheduled tweet, though, so we'll have to track that. If he's in, I think he's fine, although I don't like him as much as some of these cheaper guys right now. Eckler ranks as my 5th overall play. Somebody who's going a little bit under the radar right now, just 10 projected ownership for me, is James Robinson. I mean, look, Carlos Hyde might have taken like 45% of the snaps in one of those preseason games, but Robinson was the guy on the blitz pickups. Robinson was the guy on the third downs. Robinson is going to probably see somewhere around, especially as a nice 3-point favorite, 24 implied team total against Houston, who I would say has the worst defensive line in the league. This is a spot at $6,400 with pass catching chops. If he stays around 10% ownership, and if it continues to reduce, like if other guys keep picking up ownership, I think that James Robinson is one of the better, if not best, running back play on the slate in this 6K range. And you keep going down. Najee Harris is there. Concern for Najee Harris, 6.5 point underdog, second biggest underdog on the slate. He's probably going to start to run for 3.5 yards for this team. I think he's a nice option in bringbacks of Josh Allen stacks. I'd rather go to receivers, just use any of them. Deontay, Juju, Claypool, probably my favorite there being Deontay Johnson. But Najee is in play probably mainly for me in those run backs for Buffalo because of how loaded this 6K range is. Because the best play for me right now in my projections, picking up 14% ownership, so not bad. Like if it goes to 18 to 20, then we start to think about it. But a 14% ownership, that's fine. That's modest ownership on this guy, and we can get different elsewhere. For Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon goes up in this matchup against Minnesota. It's a great matchup. He's a 3.5 point underdog, but he's going to be an elite pass catching running back for us. He is right now projecting out for me for 16.8 fantasy points in my projections down below. You can see them all on Patreon. Ownership rankings, the optimizer, the 23 pages of matchup notes, Sundays, closing thoughts, podcast, just for Patrons only on GPP strategy, the showdown stuff, all that stuff. Check it out down below. But Joe Mixon ranks out as my number 1 play. I'm going to track this. Like if Joe Mixon gets up to 18% ownership and James Robinson goes down to 8, I mean, James Robinson, better matchup. James Robinson, a favorite, I think, for a $200 bump up. That's a nice pivot to go to. But right now, I think they're both firmly in play. If you wanted to go, I lean wide receivers more often because I like to game stack full on, run it back on the opposite side, 2 pass catchers. So I usually lean wide receivers in the flex. It's not always like that, though. But if you wanted to go with like an Alvin Kamara, Robinson, Joe Mixon, I think that's completely fine. I think there's enough touches for each of those guys to see probably 18 to 22 touches apiece. Now, those are my firm yeses, and I can scroll down. There's a bunch of maybes that these guys will jump in or not, but I expect most of my lineups to be built around those guys. Like Dalvin Cook, mainly probably a piece in some of my runbacks of Cincinnati stacks. I'd rather go to an Alvin Kamara here, or I'd rather go up to a Christian McCaffrey. DeAndre Swift, the price point's too much, and I probably won't end up getting there. If he was like 5,900 or 6,000 flat, I think about it more for the guy who's probably going to be second on this team, might see 8 targets in this game. Aaron Jones, the concern is just a matchup, like a 4.5 point favorite, 27.25 team implied total. Going to see more usage in the passing game with Jamal Williams gone. The concern, though, is just a matchup. Like Aaron Jones still ranks out pretty solid for me. I believe he's like my number 8 overall running back on the week, so he might get in there. The problem is at that price point, just give me the cheaper Joe Mixon or James Robinson, maybe even Najee Harris, a similarly priced Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's an even bigger favorite, who has an even better team implied total right now. Clyde Edwards-Helaire for me ranks out as 15.5 fantasy points. Jones is at about 17, so it's a little bit of a difference in projection, but I will take that if there's a difference in ownership. Like Aaron Jones right now for me is 12% owned. Somehow Clyde Edwards-Helaire is only 5% owned. That is, as of this recording, that's pretty crazy to me. I would definitely take Clyde if that holds up over Aaron Jones. Lots of other running backs in here. Miles Sanders is like 3% owned right now. I think he's a fantastic option in run back options of Atlanta. If you wanted to go to Matt Ryan, Kyle Pitts, and Calvin Ridley, run it back with just Miles Sanders on the opposite side, or Miles Sanders and a Devonta Smith, I think that's great. He's going to see 18 touches. They only have 3 running backs. They only kept 3 running backs, right? They didn't play him in the preseason because they value him. Number 3 in snapshot at the running back position last year. Boston Scott never took any work from him. Kenny Gainwell is going to be buried on this depth chart, at least for the start of the season. Miles Sanders is a very low-owned option in that loaded 6K range. Also looks solid. And the rest of these guys are just GPP dart throws. A lot of them probably don't make any major part of my exposure. If I'm going to Seattle, I'm probably going to the stacks of Russell Wilson, but Carson is there. Antonio Gibson's kind of this wild card. A terrible team implied total. I think the lowest or third lowest on the slate at 21.75 against the Chargers. But if he can get that passing game role, it looks good. He just didn't get it last year or in preseason. Raheem Mostert, only a GPP option. Amazing 8-point favorites against this bad defensive line of Detroit. He might see 16 to 18 touches to start the season off. That would be very, very good at what I have for Raheem Mostert right now, just 3% ownership. And you can see the rest of the guys here. I think that the last 2 guys I'll talk about is Damian Harris, a 3-point favorite, low implied team total. You're not going to get much pass catching work, so you're hoping Damian Harris goes for 16 to 17 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown. That's like a good game for him if he gets in the end zone. That's only 14 fantasy points, so it's tough to want to go there, especially since he's over 5K. I'd rather go to $600 cheaper Chase Edmonds, who right now is going to probably be in a split with James Conner. Conner might get the goal line work, but at least Edmonds is going to be out there probably running 18 to 20 routes in a high-paced offense that is going to see a lot of plays. I've got Chase Edmonds right now for me for around 11 fantasy points in this game, so I think that that's probably the first solid spot that I would go to if I'm trying to go to the 4K range at the running back position. And as we get into the biggest and most important part of the slate, the wide receiver position, because there's so many of them and there's value up and down the board, I do want to let you know that officially we are now partnered and sponsored by, on some of these shows at least, DraftKings. Yes, we're talking about DraftKings. We're finally partnered by them, and here you go. Now is the time to celebrate. The first NFL Sunday of the season is about to kick off, and DraftKings, the official daily fantasy partner of NFL, is putting you in the center of this weekend's action. So download the DraftKings app now and use that code SAL. This week, new customers get a free shot at $1 million in top prize and compete for millions in prizes across all contests. Enter the code SAL to get a free shot at that $1 million top prize with your first deposit. Again, that is code SAL, only at DraftKings, the official daily fantasy partner of the NFL. Minimum $5 deposit required. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for more details. All right, and as we talk through DraftKings, let's slide now into more DraftKings, and we'll go to the wide receiver position, which here's the thing about the wide receiver position, right? First and foremost, to start this off, because this is pretty important. The wide receiver of this position this week is basically just anchored on stars and scrubs. Like, that's where you're going to see all the ownership. Everybody wants to pay all the way up, and as you probably should want to, at least your first thoughts, and you can see all these yeses here because, my God, I mean, look at all the yeses. I've got like 17 yeses in an interest pool right now, which is obviously going to have to be shaved down, but not by much. I've got about 39 wide receivers. You might think that it has to be shaved down across 150 lineups. Not really. But the way that a lot of people will go is to go down and play Marquise Callaway, who's 20% owned, which he's a fine play. I mean, he's a fine play. You put him in your flex spot. He plays later in the day, or play Marvin Jones, who plays earlier in the day. I prefer Marquise Callaway. He's my number 1 graded wide receiver right now. He's going to be massively owned. I do think the pivot to a Traquan Smith makes a lot of sense, but only if you're trailing heading into that last game. Like, if you have a lineup that's popping off and you have Marquise Callaway, a highly owned guy, later in the day, keep him because he looks like a top value. He's my number 1 value for 12.7 fantasy points at 3,400. If you have a lineup that has Marquise Callaway and you need to make up some ground, well, then just easily pivot to his teammate if you have the funds. Of course, Traquan Smith's more expensive, or pivot to his teammate Deontay Harris or somebody else in that window and hope that they outscore them so you can make up more ground on the competition. But there's not much to say about some of these guys up here. I mean, it's if you have the money left over. Davante Adams is clearly the 42.2% red zone target share last year. The guy who's going to see just a bunch of nobodies. Like, Marshawn Lattimore is going to play 72% of the time on the right side of the field. You're going to be able to see not much of the rookie on the other side of the field for the Saints. Gardner Johnson in the slot. These are all fantastic spots that Adams will be seeing all of them. Calvin Ridley right now for me is about 18% owned. He's right around being one of the highest owned receivers, up there with Diggs and guys like Davante Adams. Calvin Ridley, mainly going to be getting him in run backs or in those game stacks. He looks fantastic, though. But the guy I like the most right now, like out of all the receivers that are up here in this 7K plus range, they all look great. Adams, if you can afford him, fantastic. Factoring in price point, Justin Jefferson is the guy that I want at $7,700. I mean, Justin Jefferson, if his ownership of only 8% holds up right now, I love Justin Jefferson a ton. He's going to have a fantastic matchup, a very good matchup in this game. He'll see a lot of Awuzie, who was the 6th worst cornerback last year on a fantasy point per route run basis. And not only that, I got him projected for 19 points, and that's just a median projection. There's no Irv Smith. This guy saw a 20+% red zone target share last year, even though Adam Thielen saw a ton. And we know how good Justin Jefferson was. Now we get Cincinnati with a 26 implied team total, with his team being just barely 3-point favorites. I like this a lot. I mean, Justin Jefferson might be one of the most in line right there with Devontae Adams and Calvin Ridley for double-digit targets this week, and he's going to be probably half the ownership as those guys. You keep going down, Stephon Diggs is a clear and obvious option. Anytime you're playing Josh Allen, you probably should have Stephon Diggs in probably every single one of those lineups. Steph Diggs overall, like if you just take out the ownership, you're factoring in this whole entire slate. Jefferson is my favorite because he's that lower owned out of these guys. But if you're just looking at everything above 7K, factoring in, I don't care how owned they are or what their quarterback is, trying to stack this up, it's Steph Diggs. I love the combination of Josh Allen and Steph Diggs. I even like him more than Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill this week. I like him more than Rodgers and Adams. Matt Ryan and Calvin Ridley is close because of how cheap Ryan is, but Josh Allen and Steph Diggs is my favorite just quarterback wide receiver stack as of right now. Somebody who's close to Justin Jefferson in terms of just not much ownership, but obviously a fantastic player is DK Metcalf at 7,500. I have him around 10% owned right now. I prefer Jefferson in that low owned range, but if you wanted to go Seattle stacks, he's going to be low owned. These are a couple guys that don't really make much sense to me. All of these guys really, like these next 5 guys, they're all going to be like 5% owned. And here's the thing, like we talked about earlier, everybody's going to want to draft those $3,000 to $4,000 receivers, maybe even the high 5K or low 5K, high 4K range, and then they're going to go up for 1 to 2 studs. So it's going to leave most of the 5K range and the 6K range completely empty of ownership. Keenan Allen I have for 5% ownership this week. Keenan Allen I also have as a top 10 play this week. Keenan Allen, according to Pro Football Focus, has a top 5 matchup against the Washington secondary that is struggling to really find any bodies out there to be somebodies. Julio Jones I currently have, and this will definitely come up. I would assume comes up, but maybe by 3 times the amount. I have Julio Jones at 1.5% owned. Maybe he gets to 5% ownership. Julio Jones has the number 1 overall matchup this week against Arizona. They have nobody out there since Malcolm Butler retired. He has 32 pounds on any of the cornerbacks that are going to be facing him. According to Pro Football Focus, the number 1 overall matchup right now at 1% owned, because he's in that range of 6,800 where people would rather say, hey, why would I play $6,800 Julio Jones and Michael Pittman, which I think is a more than fine combination at low ownership, when I can rather go down to $3,400 Marquez Callaway and then go up to a $7,400 player at the wide receiver position, right? That's what everybody's doing this week. Or they're getting even more extreme and going to the flat minimum of Terrace Marshall, and now they're going up to a combination of Steph Diggs and Terrace Marshall instead of Julio and Michael Pittman. And I see the appeal there, but I also caution you that the other option in Julio and Michael Pittman will be a half to a third to a quarter of the ownership for similar output and ceiling. And that same analysis can be said for all these guys. Tyler Lockett, Terry McLaurin, all these guys for me are coming in at like 5 to 6% ownership as being stud number 1 or 1A, 1Bs in their offense, and these teams have nice implied totals. Julio, 27.5, 26 for Lockett. I've got Lockett for almost 17 fantasy points at 6,700. If I had to choose one of these guys, I'd take Lockett over Julio because I like that stack more, but all these guys are in play. Robbie Anderson in a 4-headed now back or receiving core with Christian McCaffrey and Terrace Marshall there along with DJ Moore. But Anderson's in this 5K range. He's kind of in no man's land, right? There's not many guys in this mid 5K range that are even really that playable or that appealing. And he's there at 5,700 for a guy who gets paired back up with Sam Darnold. Look good in the preseason. They were using him not as a deep threat last year. That was DJ Moore, believe it or not, based on their skill sets. You would think it would be flipped around. But they were using Robbie Anderson as the chain mover, the 15-yard guy. That's why he kept seeing a bunch of targets and was top 10 in targets for most of the season. I have Robbie Anderson for over 14 fantasy points at just 5% ownership. I have him as a B play in GPPs and a B in cash. Corey Davis here, 4,900 is a fine price point for the number 1 receiver there. T. Higgins is going to pick up ownership. I think he picks up double digit. I have him around 14% owned right now. I still like T. Higgins the most out of all those guys, but just pair up T. Higgins with a lower owned Jamar Chase. All this negative feedback that Jamar Chase says that NFL balls are bigger and he can't really catch them, I think it's all hoopla. He's 4% owned right now as a guy who's in the 4K range, drafted 4th overall. Obviously, with that 2019 season in college at LSU with Joe Burrow. If you want to stack up Cincinnati, Jamar Chase has to be in those stacks if you really want to win $1 million. He's going to be like 4% owned, and he clearly has the talent to be maybe the best receiver on this team. But if you want to go Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, I think it's fine to still have low ownership. Michael Pittman is a really strong pivot if you have enough money to get off of a Marquise Callaway, who's going to be 20% owned to have right now, and go down to a Michael Pittman who's going to be 7, 6, somewhere in there, like a third to a quarter of the ownership for a guy, Michael Pittman, who is a better receiver than Marcus Callaway. I think that's pretty obvious. Like, he might not be, and he's also the number 1 on his team. He might not have Jameis throwing him the ball, but Carson Wentz, I think people are dead and burying him, but I could still see a 6 for 80-yard game out of Michael Pittman, if not a touchdown in there as well as a number 1 receiver, no T.Y. Hilton. So people are sleeping on really everybody in this 4 and 5K range because they want all those $3,000 options, which I get the appeal of it, but it's not going to be that appealing if everybody is doing it, which is happening right now. Marvin Jones is a yes for me. He probably moves to a maybe and becomes less appealing because I'd rather go up to a Michael Pittman at what is going to be right now probably a third of the ownership at the exact same price point. If ownership currently holds, like in cash games, it's Marvin Jones. But if ownership currently holds at the exact same price point, you're going to see Jalen Waddle be about 3% owned this week, and you're going to see Marvin Jones be close to 12 to 15%. Like, just listen to this. Jalen Waddle is 3% owned in my projections right now, and I have him projected for 10 fantasy points. Marvin Jones is 12%, 4 times his owned, and I have him projected at 11.5 fantasy points. And I think that Jalen Waddle has a higher ceiling. No Will Fuller out there this week. Tua actually has a whole playbook. So 4 times higher owned is Marvin Jones, and he's only projected for like a point more. So give me Jalen Waddle and GPPs over Marvin Jones, believe it or not. I love Marvin Jones, individual players, and higher projection is Marvin Jones, but we're factoring in now the overall ownership, which is the game theory side of it. Marquez Callaway is there. Like I said, he's going to probably be the highest owned receiver this week. I think Marquez Callaway is still a fine play, but only if you put him in that late slot. If your GPP lineup is popping off, great. You already have a great lineup, and now you have a great value play going later in the day. But your GPP lineup is doing bad. Well, now you better be ready to change out quickly that pick that you had in there of Marvin Jones. And a lot of other receivers are in here. Elijah Moore, if there's no Crowder, I like him either way, but if there's no Crowder, becomes just an insane have to play this guy type of play. Hopkins is in there for those stacks. And then everybody else in here is basically going to be stacks or run back options. Like they're not priorities. Like Deontay Johnson, run back option in those Buffalo stacks. Same with all these other players. Odell Beckham Jr., run back option for the Chiefs. Russell Gage is going to be in my groups with Matt Ryan and as a run back for Jalen Hurts. Maybe some one-off options in here like a Brandon Cooks or Cortland Sutton or Jacoby Myers, although I think they'll probably not really make my final exposures compared to some other players in here. Traquan Smith, a 1% owned Traquan Smith, I think is a fantastic pivot off of what's going to be a 20% Marquez Callaway. Again, Callaway's still fine, but still a fantastic pivot. People just thinking that Traquan Smith stinks. I get there's a nice price difference, though, $1,500 there. Jamar Chase, I'm going to do this live while we're in here right now. I'm going to make Jamar Chase a yes right here because this GPP is not cash. He's going to be like 4% owned, 3% owned. That's a fantastic spot to be in, which would be one of the better game environments. Devonta Smith is going to be in stacks. So you can see all these guys in here. This is probably going to get filtered down to around 36 to 37 wide receivers, and it'll probably be majority of my ownership in like 12 to 15 of them. So now we'll finish it up with the tight end position. I don't really cover defenses at all because it's pointless. Just take the cheapest ones. The Bengals are $2,000 flat this week. Yeah, I like them a lot, right? I'm not spending up on defenses. It's pointless to be doing that in my opinion, unless it's like Kendall Hinton playing like last year, middle of the week because of COVID. So the tight end position will slide. And hey, if you're still here, like and subscribe. I greatly appreciate that. And make sure you get that Patrick Mahomes free bet of over a half a fantasy point that's going on, or half of passing yard that's going on Prize Picks. Use that code SAL. So pretty simple here for tight ends. There's a lot that are in play because here's the thing. If you're not taking one of these top 4 or 5 tight ends this week, all the rest of them are basically the same. Go for cheap guys that you can put into stacks to increase their overall upside for you because you get correlation with their quarterback or on the run back. But you can see a bunch of tight ends are yeses for me because it really just depends like what lineup you're building. If you're building a Patrick Mahomes lineup, yeah, Travis Kelce is a yes. Yeah, Travis Kelce is probably going to be one of the 2, if not highest owned guy this week. But Travis Kelce also is by far my highest projected tight end. I have Travis Kelce for 3.3 more points than any other tight end. And if you take out George Kittle, I have Travis Kelce for 6 more points than any other tight end. You know he's good. We get that. Highest total looks good. George Kittle is my second highest projected guy right now. If we just look at overall values, George Kittle comes in as my number 4 overall tight end play. The guy that I think is probably the best tight end play, there's 2 of them, but the best one that's at least proven on the slate is going to be TJ Hawkinson, coming in with ownership, but 12% ownership. I think he leads this team with like a 20 to 25% target rate and target share. No other receivers are at all really on this team. They are going to be decent underdogs of about 8 points, the worst team implied total, but I don't need the touchdown. I don't need it. He's only 4,900. I don't need a touchdown and 20 fantasy points. I'll take it, but if I can just get a 6-catch, 70-yard game, 75-yard, we'll take that as well at this price point. So Hawkinson's my number 2 overall tight end play. Logan Thomas is in here. He's just fine. Kyle Pitts will probably end up being right there with Kelce and Hawkinson as the highest owned, and Kittle. Those are the 4 guys that I projected for double-digit ownership. He's probably going to be right in there. He's my number 3 overall play this week at 11.2 fantasy points. I have him currently projected tied with Kelce as my highest projected tight end in terms of ownership at 14. He's a fantastic option in Matt Ryan stacks because he's so cheap at 4,400. The fact that Kyle Pitts is 4,400 makes it really difficult to have any strong conviction around Mike Gesicki or Jonnu Smith or any of these guys who are within a couple $100s of him. After Kyle Pitts, I go down to Gerald Everett, my number 5 overall play this week. If you're trying to find a cheap guy to pair up with a DK Metcalf or a Tyler Lockett because you have expensive Russell Wilson in there in your stack, it's Gerald Everett this week, who's coming in as a very athletic tight end and really the number 3 receiver on this team. And then there's a couple of punt plays, right? My number 1 overall play because he's so cheap is 6.8 fantasy points for Tyler Kroft. He had 2 touchdowns in the preseason. Don't overlook that. It was just 2 red zone targets, although it's nice to see he's involved. Chris Herndon now gone. I think he'll probably end up being 5-6% owned. That's where I have him at right now. And then Tyler Conklin, who's now the number 1 tight end. Herndon went to his team away from Tyler Kroft's, but the number 1 tight end right now for this Minnesota team is indeed Tyler Conklin. He had 28 targets in the last 4 weeks last year when Kyle Rudolph was out. So I like Tyler Conklin probably more than Tyler Kroft for $400 more. I think he comes in lower owned. I have him right now for a similar projection of around 6 to 7 fantasy points. So those are the guys that I like. A bunch of other tight ends are in play, of course. It depends on your stacks. If you wanted to go to a Dawson Knox in your Buffalo stacks, I probably wouldn't. I don't think there's much upside. If you want to go to a Jared Cook in your stacks with Mr. Justin Herbert, Zach Ertz is an interesting play. The problem is, like, I like Hurts for the price point over Dallas Goedert every day of the week. I'm not really interested in Goedert at $4,800 unless it's a stack. But the problem with Ertz at $3,800 is If it's not a stack, it's just so hard to go there when Kyle Pitts is a little bit more money and really not that much more money. When Gerald Everett is $400 less and at this point in his career, a better player attached to a better quarterback, right? So it's tougher to get there. But there's tight ends. There's all the positions. There's your 30-minute breakdown of week 1. The final thoughts tomorrow. The That One Dude video. Yes, the series is back. Sunday, a live stream. Sunday morning, Patreon podcast. If you are not a Patreon member, be sure right now, take a second of your time, go in the description below, join the community. We have a Discord as well for all Patreon members, along with all the other perks discussed in this video. You can check that out down below. An optimizer now. So thank you for tuning in. You all rock. Like and subscribe before you go. Get that Patrick Mahomes over a half a passing yard. Use the code SAL. You get free money up to $100 and you get the free bet. How much more can you do? It's a limited time just for this week. It's Friday morning until Sunday when the games start. Then it closes. And then you're not getting the free bet, the free money out there right now. Buy yourself a nice Chipotle burrito or some shit afterwards. You all rock. I had to get a bunch of content prepped earlier because I had a family coming this weekend. Next week will be a little bit easier. So maybe we'll get a little bit more energy out, let our shoulders lean a little bit more. But thanks for tuning in. Like and subscribe before you go. I'll see you on the next one. Let me know in the comments down below. Who was your favorite running back play on the week? Peace out, gang.